Public Relations. Edward L. Bernays. 1945. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 2. Public Relations in Action. 21. Public Relations in the Theatrical World: The Crisis in the American Theater and Some Possible Solutions. In the summer of 1949, the League of New York Theaters Incorporated, Association of Theater Producers, asked us to make a survey of the American theater. In accepting this assignment, we told the League that to be most effective, a survey of this nature should include 1. Representative sampling of general public opinion, broken down into the attitudes of the various socioeconomic groups with reference to age, sex, educational, social, cultural, religious, business, and ethnic backgrounds. 2. Research of literature relating to the field, for basic factual information and broad general trends of the thought. 3. Intensive sampling of the professional point of view of all those engaged in the theater, to obtain representative factual information and opinion. We also pointed out that, in view of the particular field of opinion to be surveyed and the limitations of time, this survey should seek to obtain as broad a coverage of general facts and attitudes as was possible to get. For purposes of fact and attitude finding, the country was to be divided into two main sections: New York and the rest of the United States. These general principles were accepted by the late Brock Pemberton, president of the League. We further suggested that the survey of the socioeconomic groups be conducted by a combination of two methods: depth interviews and letter interviews. In the selection of the samplings, for both the personal and the letter interviews, careful preliminary study was to be made to ensure an adequate sampling of the various ethnic and cultural groupings. In making such an apportionment, the income levels, for example, were to be carefully divided between highest, upper middle, and lowest. The number of letters and interviews in each group was to correspond roughly to the percentage that each income level bore to the overall income picture of the United States. The same technique was to be employed in the breakdown of age, sex, business background, and other relevant factors. For the investigation of existing literature on the theater, we undertook to provide trained researchers who would make a study of the material in the New York Public Library, specialized libraries pertinent to the field, and theatrical trade publications. The literary research of the survey was to provide a broad background of historical and contemporary information concerning the role of the theater in American society, and a bird's-eye view of both the long-existing problems and those due to the increased complexity of the modern sociological pattern. It would also give a perspective on previous approaches to the maladjustments between the theater and the public, with information concerning results obtained from them. The section of the survey dealing with intensive sampling of the professionals was to obtain the points of view of all sections of the theater. Such interviews, it seemed to us, would be particularly valuable in revealing not only basic information but also areas of agreement and disagreement and suggestions for improvement based on first-hand experience. On the basis of the information obtained, we would make recommendations as to how the theater might meet the current crisis, taking note of successful methods previously employed in the United States and other countries in bringing the theater and the general public together, with an evaluation of their applicability to the present situation. In addition, the recommendations would present a detailed blueprint of action designed to negate as far as possible present unfavorable attitudes, to intensify all existing favorable attitudes, and to create favorable attitudes among those sections of the public that did not have any particular feeling for the theater one way or another. The recommendations would take into consideration the part that could be played by group leaders throughout the country in achieving these goals. The recommendations would also, 1. Outline steps that should be taken by the theatrical profession itself to achieve the desired results. 2. Outline a general publicity campaign to be carried forward for the common purpose. 3. Include strategies to employ in future activities, themes to emphasize in such a program in cooperation with various groups of the public, and the media of communication that should be used. 4. Specify the organization necessary for effectively carrying out the project and for its proper timing. The complete survey, running to 850 pages, and the recommendations were submitted to the League of New York Theaters at its annual meeting in October, 1949. At that meeting, I read a summary of them. This chapter covers the survey summary and is also based in part on an article, Theater Survey, which appeared in the December, 1949, issue of Theater Arts magazine. When the League of New York Theaters asked us to make a survey of the American theater, we decided that though such a survey could not touch on the deeper factors of contemporary history that make the theater what it is or tackle the mystery of how great plays are born, we could apply the techniques of the social sciences to meet the League's objectives. The universal crisis through which the world is now passing had affected the theater, like all other forms of thought and art, and the theater needed to adapt itself to a world that had changed profoundly since Lady Windermere's Fan, The Devil's Disciple, and The Hairy Ape. Theater figures. Figures highlight the decline of the American theater. In 1912, Broadway produced 38 shows. The curve swung steadily upward till the season of 1928-29, when Broadway produced 224 shows. The graph has gone down ever since. In the season of 1948-49, Broadway produced only 70 shows, a drop of 70% in 20 years. The number of New York playhouses has followed the same pattern. They increased from 38 in 1913 to 75 in 1929. Then they declined steadily. In 1949 there were only 39. They continue to vanish at the rate of 2 or 3 a year. Not a single theater has been built in 22 years. If this rate of decline continues, in a decade or so we may expect to see legitimate theaters in New York disappear completely. The theater in 1949 occupied a very small sector of the vast entertainment field. Movies, radio, and television had a combined capital investment of $7 billion. Movies spent $400 million a year on production. Radio billings totaled $2 billion a year. The theater spent only $5 to $6 million a year on production. So, too, with audience figures. There are 96 million radio sets in America, and every week 70 million people go to America's approximately 18,500 movie houses. But in peak months, the legitimate theater entertains only 500,000 people a week. The League asked us to do for its members, most of New York's theater producers and owners, what we have done in the past quarter of a century for corporations, trade unions, governments, educational institutions, scientific groups, and individual theaters. They wanted us to make a comprehensive survey that would help them to correct maladjustments within the theater and between the theater and the public. To give the League the kind of survey it required, we attempted to discover the social dynamics of the situation. The figures quoted above show the theater's economic crisis, but the crisis pervades every aspect of the legitimate theater. The theater and the public. We are confronted by maladjustments among the groups within the theater and maladjustments between the theater and the public. But society deals with a disturbance in industry by invoking law, or public opinion, or both, if it wants what an industry provides. Chaos and crisis brought the Interstate Commerce Act to the railway industry, the Pure Food and Drug Acts to the food and pharmaceutical industries, and the Volstead Act to the liquor industry. When we made the survey, theaters to some extent were already regulated by law, in brokerage ticket sales and theater building regulations. And certainly the public, through adverse criticism and non-support, was making its voice heard. As is clearly evident, the best way for an industry or profession to avoid unnecessary or drastic moves by law or public opinion is to undertake prior action to bring itself in line with public desires, both within the field and in relation to the public. The baseball industry and the movies have done this. The League had told us its 3 major objectives. 1. To broaden and strengthen the role of the theater in the social and cultural life of America so that the theater may enjoy the high status in the public mind to which it is entitled. 2. To improve relations between the public and the legitimate theater, and 3. To increase theater attendance by intensifying favorable attitudes of regular and occasional theatergoers, and by recruiting new theatergoers. To get a balanced perspective of these objectives, we used a modern technique, which we have used successfully in other areas, to discover both the maladjustments within the field and between it and the public. Our method is to attempt to discover the social dynamics of a situation, the interrelationships existing between the various groups that make up a profession or field of industry, and, in turn, the relations between the field and the public, with a view to making recommendations that will correct and improve the situation. Polls and questionnaires are subsidiary devices, mere tools for fundamental techniques. 5 inquiries. As noted in the introduction to this chapter, we made 5 basic studies in analyzing the problem. First, we examined the existing literature on the theater, analyzing over 100 books and magazine articles to give us historical background and a clear perspective. We also reviewed previous published and unpublished studies on the theater. Second, we conducted personal interviews with 30 selected theatrical leaders nominated by the League of New York Theaters, including producers, critics, editors, box office treasurers, brokers, theater owners, actors, actresses, officers of theatrical unions, and playwrights. They disclosed basic information, conflicting points of view, areas of agreement and disagreement, and suggestions for improving the theater. Third, we conducted depth interviews with 400 men and women of upper and middle bracket incomes. Selected by the League, they were representative of the theater-going public in 9 cities throughout the United States. These interviews gave a qualitative measure of public opinion with regard to difference in age, sex, income, and geographical location. Fourth, by mail questionnaires we approached the heads of various occupations and professions, selected from who's who in America, and also people in middle and upper income groups in 27 cities throughout the country on a representative geographical apportionment. These people were asked 35 questions concerning their likes and dislikes, adjustments and maladjustments, so far as the theater was concerned. Fifth, we made a study of London West End methods of ticket sale and distribution to find out whether any lessons could be applied from the English to the American scene. Opinions of theater leaders. First, let us consider what theater leaders told us about the theater. They discussed the things they thought were important: the overall situation, the theater audience, production, employment, ticket distribution, theatrical facilities, non-commercial theater, playwriting, and so on. Economic maladjustments. In evaluating the crisis, theater leaders emphasized economic maladjustments, such as the high cost of producing plays, of theater rentals, of sets, props, and costumes, the high price of tickets and the public's inability to pay for them, especially with the addition of the 20% federal tax, the high cost of actors and other theater personnel, the insecurity of employment in the theater and consequent high labor costs, the rigid, uneconomic building code and the problem of ownership and control of theater buildings, bad ticket distribution, gyp ticket sales, railway costs, the short theater season, featherbedding, the competition of the movies, radio and television for creative talent, and current business conditions. Maladjustments in creativity. Theater leaders also emphasized maladjustments in creativity, the shortage of good scripts, the flight of the best playwrights to Hollywood and radio, the lack of experimental theaters, the failure of producers to encourage summer theaters and college talent, and the failure of actors to take advantage of the stock company as a training school, the refusal of stars to play on the road. Producer cooperation needed. In considering the contribution of production to the theater crisis, some said that producers plan and handle productions in an unbusinesslike way, that they fail to cooperate with each other in dealing with their problems and in pooling theaters, that they waste money making sets, that they skimp on road shows and withdraw them as soon as movie rights are sold. Some suggested that the theater needs central property warehouses, manufacturing of sets outside of New York, a rental basis for properties, a reduction in rehearsal time, more Sunday performances, and an all-year-round theater season. It was also said that union rules make tryouts difficult. Ticket distribution. In the matter of poor ticket distribution, theater leaders stressed the operation of gyp brokers, the low allowance to legitimate brokers, the drain on seats at hit shows by theater parties, the lack of special rate tickets for students, and failure to sell tickets for good shows after these have taken their cream off the market. Some told us that producers are not interested in controlling diggers and scalpers, that they tolerate the present system of tickets for marginal shows, and that they do not cooperate as they should with honest ticket brokers. Some thought the way to overcome the evils created by brokers' greed is to establish a centralized system of ticket distribution. And some suggested that large theaters should sell tickets at $2 tops, and larger houses at $1.80 tops. Poor promotion. A number of theater leaders emphasized that the theater follows outmoded and inefficient promotional and advertising methods in selling tickets and that not sufficient promotion of the theater as a whole is carried on via radio, television, and general advertising. Some said the theater crisis is partly due to lack of subscription seat sales, failure to take advantage of show trains, and poor promotional methods in regard to hotels, railways, conventions, and the like. Producers, they said, pass up the possibilities of the road, which can bring them new audiences, and neglect the mail-order business. Unfriendly personnel. Theater leaders had much to say about how the theater deals with the public. Many blamed the present crisis on the discourteous attitude of theater personnel. Box office men, they told us, are often rude, ushers and other employees fail to handle the public properly. Theater personnel that comes in direct contact with the public is not closely supervised, as in other organizations dealing directly with the public. Public education needed. Some theater leaders wanted to educate public schools and communities to appreciate the vital importance of the theater in American life, and felt that many producers have an unrealistic approach to the public and the press. Critics. As for the critics, some theater leaders thought they ought to be more aware of their power and influence, that they should attend tryouts of plays and make suggestions for improving them, that they should educate the public to give up its addiction to the star system, they would review plays more accurately if they sat in different parts of the house, as the audience does, and saw the play through to the end. The public's faults. Theater leaders had plenty to say about the public, too. The public contributes to the theater crisis, they told us, because it wants only hit shows and stars. It has become sophisticated and demands plays that are increasingly difficult to find. Furthermore, theater leaders said, the public does not understand the economics of the theater, and doesn't even know how to buy tickets. People do not appreciate the role of the broker, who saves them time, carries their accounts, and gets and delivers tickets. And some said that the public still suffers from a psychological hangover induced by the bootlegger era and wartime boom it wants to be gypped. And it wants the theater to give it nothing but escapist entertainment. Public's opinions from 400 depth interviews. What is the theater-going public's opinion? I shall touch only on the most important findings of the interviews with 400 men and women of middle and upper income groups in 9 selected cities. Play preference. We found that musical comedy is well ahead in general preference, with serious drama second, comedy third. Then came romantic drama, historical plays, tragedies, and mysteries. 1/3 of those we interviewed make it a practice to see the latest hit shows, especially in New York. They told us the commercial theater was available in 85.9% of the communities we investigated. But only half this number said they preferred the commercial theater. Theater attendance. The average person interviewed goes to the theater 4 or 5 times a year. In New York the figure is nearly 6 times a year. People go to the theater less now than they did either during or before the war. Compared with wartime attendance, the decline is 5.8%. Compared with pre-war attendance, the decline is 12.3%. For New York the figures are higher. Compared with wartime attendance, the drop has been 10%. Compared with pre-war attendance, 18%. What does the public think would remedy this decline in attendance? 3/4 said they would go to the theater more often if tickets were less expensive. Nearly 67% would go more often if they were offered the kind of plays they like. Ticket scarcity was cited everywhere as an important factor. Physical comfort in the theater. People throughout the country want more comfortable theaters, better acting, and more New York plays outside New York. The biggest complaint about physical matters was discomfort, particularly lack of leg room, too narrow seats, too hard seats, and seats with poor visibility. About 20% of the persons interviewed mentioned the need for proper ventilation. Others wanted better acoustics and more modern equipment. Ticket distribution. The interviewees mentioned 4 factors in the business of obtaining tickets. In this order: tickets are sold out for a long time in advance. 70.6% mentioned this. Seats are sold at a premium. It is hard to get cheaper seats. No telephone orders are accepted. Only about 10% reported paying more than $5 per ticket. The average price was just over $3. It was higher in New York, of course. Theater versus movies. 62.5% of those interviewed spend less on the theater than on movies. The figures are about even between theater and sports events. They spend twice as much on theater as on opera and concerts, but 69.5% spend less on theater than on home entertainment. In New York, however, they spend about as much for the theater as for movies. There, too, theater spending far outweighs opera, concerts, and sports. Cultural value. It may interest you to know that 82.6% of those we interviewed, that is, the vast majority, consider the commercial theater an important factor in the cultural life of their city. They said it provides a better type of entertainment, has educational and cultural values, helps community betterment, broadens life experience, stimulates the mind, furthers aesthetic appreciation, is more effective than the movies, and has good social implications. Public opinion from 5,000 mail questionnaires. All these findings were confirmed by the mail questionnaire that we sent to 2,500 group leaders in various occupations selected from Who's Who in America, and to 2,500 people in upper and middle income levels in 27 cities throughout the country on a representative geographical apportionment. The percentages were somewhat different, but here, too, most people complained of the high price of tickets, suggested improving the physical comfort of the theaters, said tickets were hard to get, and so on. And here, too, the vast majority considered the commercial theater an important factor in the cultural life of their city. The London Theatre Survey findings. In our survey of London theatres and the public, we found that distribution of tickets is much more highly organized. Brokers utilize a widespread network of branches and sub-agencies in hotels, steamships, high-class clubs, larger restaurants, and leading shops. These branches and sub-agencies work on a commission basis and clear all operations through their broker's main office. Things are so organized that every broker can tell quickly what tickets are available for every performance. Vouchers good for admittance are issued, thus eliminating the necessity for patrons to spend their time standing in line at the box office to exchange vouchers for tickets. Brokers and box offices have high standards of courtesy and service. Their staffs are trained and encouraged to see as many plays as possible and to read the various criticisms so that they can, when requested, give advice. Seating arrangements for theaters are displayed on posters in brokers' offices and in theater lobbies so that patrons can tell exactly where their seats are located. Pamphlets listing current attractions in all theaters are widely distributed, so that if a person cannot get seats for a show he wants, he will be encouraged to go to another one. Solution. Obviously, the American people like the theater. Our nationwide survey gave some idea of what they expect from it and what they think is wrong with it today. It told in specific detail why theater attendance is lower today than it was during and before the war, and what complaints both the public and theater leaders have made. This information gave us a starting point for constructive recommendations designed to deal with the theater crisis and to develop better relations within the industry and between the theater and the public. The survey showed that the theater crisis is a complex problem that arises from the interaction of social and economic factors and involves many intricate relations, attitudes, and action on the part of many different elements in our society. However, experience in other fields has shown that there is a broad solution to problems of this kind. That solution is possible when a voluntary association within the field assumes leadership and takes action along a wide front to bring about conditions that are both in the public interest and in the interest of the industry. Here is the approach we recommended. A challenge to leadership in this situation presents itself to the League of New York Theaters. We recommend that the League assume it. If it does not, some other group may. The League has the membership, the tradition, and the resources. It has the opportunity to enlist the forces within the theater, public opinion, and the law to work out the necessary solutions. To proceed effectively, the League must reorient its organization structurally to deal with the problem. Specifically, we recommend a multiple committee set up to cope with the major problems revealed by the survey. The committees. These committees would deal with such broad problems as educational relations, government relations, group relations, advertising and promotion, theatrical production, theatrical financing, theater buildings, press relations, fair business practices, employment problems and practices, and travel and transportation. These committees would be in addition to an overall public relations committee, the executive director of the League, the necessary secretariat, and public relations council. Committees of this type would make for a stronger League because they would identify the membership closely with the organization and provide expert assistance in specialized fields. This method has been employed effectively by organizations as diverse as the American Newspaper Publishers Association, the National Association of Broadcasters, the American Medical Association, the American Management Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American Iron and Steel Institute. Statement of Public Relations Policy. Simultaneously with such action, we recommended that the League draw up and announce a statement of public relations policy. This statement to tell the public in clear, concise language how the League intends to deal with the public. We recommended that the statement cover all those elements of the legitimate theater in which there is a public interest: the theater's role in enriching the national culture, standards for entertainment, equitable practices in the distribution of tickets, and courtesy and honesty on the part of all those who deal with the public. The purpose of this statement was to give evidence of unity and cooperation within the industry and serve as a benchmark for the conduct and individual action of the members of the League. We told the League that after it had agreed upon what it wants to do, had set up the necessary structure, and provided a realistic budget, it would then be ready to implement its public relations program. We recommended that the League's director, officers, and public relations council should work in cooperation with the various committees in integrating, coordinating, and implementing the program. Recommended activities. We recommended 2 types of activities for the League. 1. Activities in fields where League members, producers and owners, had direct control over the attitudes and actions of others. This envisaged the education and training of theater personnel and the development and standardization of effective methods and procedures for them to follow. 2. Activities in fields where League members had only partial or indirect control over the attitudes and action of others. This envisaged negotiations and direct tie-ins with other groups within the theater and with the public, enlisting public support by keeping the public informed and educated about the theater, and enlisting public opinion for modifying the law. Some important specific recommendations we made to the League regarding attitudes and actions over which League members could exercise direct control were these. Handbook for producers based on exploration and appraisal of the most effective methods and practices in theatrical production to aid them in cutting costs and increasing efficiency. Short intensive workshop course on advertising and promotion, emphasizing ways and means to improve promotional techniques and to increase public goodwill and understanding. Educational program for box office people, brokers, ushers, concessionaires, and others to assure the theater-going public of courtesy and efficiency. Continuing activity to strengthen the present theater ticket code of fair practices, to assure fair treatment of the public, and to combat unscrupulous practices in ticket distribution. This to be directed by a committee in fair business practices in cooperation with brokers, box office treasurers, theater owners and producers, civil authorities, and some impartial agencies such as the Better Business Bureau. Consideration by a committee on theater building of ways and means to improve physical equipment and comfort of present theater houses, seating, lighting, ventilation, acoustics, etc. Manual of suggestions for owners, producers, box office people, and brokers on extending and improving ticket sales methods, subscription plans, mail orders, etc. Continuing study of public opinion on the theater. Fact-finding study of present theater financing and exploration of ways and means to raise new venture capital for the theater as a legitimate business enterprise. Preparation of joint producer mailing lists of known and prospective theater ticket purchasers in New York and road cities. Cooperative promotion aimed at expansion of out-of-town theater audiences for New York through show trains, party plans, subagents, etc. Periodical bulletins for theater managers, brokers, owners, producers, and other leaders in the industry to serve as a clearinghouse for information on public relations efforts. As for attitudes and actions over which league members could exercise only partial or indirect control, we made recommendations such as these. A continuing program of information to all the mass media of communication, newspapers, magazines, radio, printed matter, and direct mail to writers and commentators, to get a more complete and accurate portrayal of fact and point of view. This activity to be supported by a press relations committee which would confer on major policy and relations between the theater and the press. A symposium on the theater conducted by mail among leading social scientists and cultural leaders. A conference on the role of the theater to be held for leaders in sociology, economics, history, and psychology at a reputable university. A campaign to reduce the 20% federal amusement tax on theater tickets. This was, of course, before the Korean War. Exploration with publishers and similar legitimate commercial channels of possibilities for cooperative public service tie-in. Cooperation with key women's organizations, government agencies, and other groups, inviting their interest and support in improving the theater and raising its social and cultural status. Cooperation with educational institutions at all levels in promoting and developing a broader understanding and appreciation of the theater and in training students for the theater. Actions and events to stimulate interest in the theater among young people, including a pamphlet on employment in the theater, essay contests, and other activities. Stimulation of public interest and participation in the theater through various types of awards, prizes, scholarships, contests, exhibits and displays, specially arranged visits to theater buildings of historic interest, Theater Speakers Bureau to supply speakers for clubs and schools, lithographed souvenir postcards of notable plays and players, bulletins listing all current theater attractions, anniversary celebrations, and the like. Fact-finding and research of ways and means to extend and improve traveling attractions throughout the country. The recommended program was a two-way street. It was a program of action to change the League's own attitudes and actions, while educating the public and enlisting its support. By presenting the public with the facts, by explaining the reasons for every situation, by reviving the great tradition of the theater, and by meeting the public's needs, we felt that the League could alter the relations between the public and the theater in the direction of its three major goals.